Hey friends, I just dropped an episode on Unfeigned Christianity giving an update about the last year. A year ago, I started experiencing some significant health issues, and it led me to pulling back completely for about 6 weeks, pretty much from everything that I was involved in, but definitely pulled back quite a bit from podcasting, writing, and that's why the last year has been quite a bit quieter from me than normal. Anyways, I share an update about that on my podcast. You can listen to it anywhere you listen to podcasts, or you can watch the video on my YouTube channel. I've even shared it on my social media pages as well, so you should be able to find it somewhere or see it in the link below. But essentially, I give an update of what happened, the health issues that did happen, but then I also share what I am looking forward to, kind of some of the plans as far as re-engaging the blog, podcasting, some writing projects, and so forth. And so I'll be honest with you, not that long before Christmas, I genuinely did not think that I would re-engage writing and podcasting. There's a variety of things. I explained it a little more in depth in the episode, but I don't explain everything. I'm sure I'll share more of it over time. But there's just a lot that has led me to reflect on whether or not this actually is healthy for me, for my family, whether or not it's serving the church, serving people well. And so there was a point, especially in the end of November, where I was kind of exasperated. There was some interactions that had happened over the election that, again, I was just like, it was several-fold. One is just like, man, people are toxic when engaging. There's a lot of things that even Christians do not want to be talked about. But then there's also this personal aspect of just like, I don't know if I'm healthy enough to be navigating this sort of thing. And there's been some ongoing work that I have been doing that probably plays a bit of a role in some of the change, but there's also just a real aspect of, since Christmas, I have felt my soul reawakening to re-engaging writing and podcasting. There are things there's a book project that I had started a couple years ago. I got about a third of the way into it, and then due to a variety of things that came to a halt. I wanted to finish it last year in 2024, but because of my health issues, it was once again shelved. But some things that God has been doing in my life, in our family's life in the last year, has just kind of amplified my desire to finish that book project. And there's also an aspect of something that I have become increasingly passionate about, is the need for Christians to be theologically anchored, emotionally and spiritually healthy. That involves even mental health, and able to love others well. Those are kind of the three pillars that I guess when I think, every time I preach, when I disciple my family, when I engage other people, when I'm writing, when I'm podcasting, like, that's what I want to do, is help us grow in being theologically anchored. I want to help us grow in emotional health. We, especially in Anabaptist churches, but honestly, I think it's throughout a lot of churches in America at large, we don't do well with emotional health, and that affects the way we interact and relate on social media. It affects the way we respond to conflicts within church, within society, and we need to grow in emotional health. I served on a couple of different church leadership teams, ministry leadership teams, and so I'm speaking as one of us as leaders. I'm not at all trying to point fingers. I speak first and foremost to myself, because that's a huge thing that God brought to the surface for me in the last year. But we as leaders are not always very emotionally healthy. And so just a passion, particularly mental health for men. And I realize that's kind of narrow, but I'm a man, and I'm 33 years old, almost 34, and it's only been in the last year that I took mental health seriously and realized like how much different things I was involved in, just different pieces to my story have played into whatever the opposite of strong mental health is, like not very strong mental health or being mentally unhealthy. And I even hesitate a little bit when I talk about that, because I think people think in terms of, when it comes to mental health, they think in terms of like psychotic breakdowns and like schizophrenia and stuff. And that's actually not what I'm talking about. Like obviously that deals with mental health a lot, but the mental health, in order to navigate conflict without thinking that everybody's set against you, like that's an aspect of mental health. And so yeah, I just negative emotions and thoughts that you don't feel like you have an ability to control, questions, deep internal questions of purpose and value. These are things that I think everybody deals with, but I know firsthand that men can deal with and often kind of stuff a little bit under the surface because you don't really know what to do with it. And you know all the right things, especially as spiritual leaders, pastors and stuff. You know that God loves you. You know that your identity is in Christ. You know that. But man, it's a whole nother ball game integrating that and internalizing that into your soul and your mind. And so, yeah, those things continue to, because of the journey that God has had me on, I'm growing in passion and burden about how to serve others in regard to that as well, as I continue growing myself. And then the third thing is loving people well. Like that is the motivation behind conversations of like how to disciple people well, how to engage culture, how to engage, and by the way, that might sound a little, I've been thinking about that a little bit. It's like, oh, loving people well, but that's why I place theologically anchored first, emotional and spiritually healthy second, and loving people well. I include missional, discipleship, evangelism, like all in that context of loving people well. I also include understanding politics through a lens of loving my neighbor. I put that in that lens as well. I put that in, like, how do I interact with people in my community? And I'm not talking about church community. I'm talking about Canyon City, Colorado, in loving people well. How do I engage my neighbors when I've got two neighbors who are proud Biden supporters or Harris supporters? It changed halfway through this last year. And the other neighbor across the street from us has a do not tread flag. They're probably flying high. How do I love people well? How do I bring them into an encounter with Jesus by the way that we're relating with them, by the truth that we're communicating with them? That's the anchor and the gist of this desire to grow in loving people well. But I just want to be honest with you that there's going to be lots of conversation. Like I need something to be very, very clear. I talk a lot about sexual wholeness. I talk a lot about romance and relationships. The reason I do that is because of my own journey, my own story in growing in sexual wholeness and growing in emotional wholeness. And our romantic relationships and our sex lives can communicate a lot about what's going on in our soul that has to do with health, spiritually, emotionally, mentally. So I gladly engage those topics. I've written a book on it. I produce a course on it. But that's one aspect. That's one aspect. I also want us to be theologically anchored. And I particularly think in our conservative Anabaptist churches, or maybe Anabaptist churches at large, that's a weakness I see, is we don't have thoughtful theological grounding. And so that affects the way that we engage Scripture. It affects the way in which we live our lives. It affects the way in which we look out and engage people. But what I need to be very clear on is I have absolutely no desire to do any writing, preaching, podcasting, counseling, if it's not ultimately helping us love others better. And it's in those conversations, how we love others better, that I've noticed. Obviously, there's some conversations that can be controversial that have to do with theology. There's some conversations that have to do with emotional, spiritual health that could be controversial. But it tends to be the conversations when, like, the goal of having this conversation, the goal of talking about this is so that we love others better. It's in those conversations that people get touchy. People feel controversy. People feel you're talking about politics. It's like, huh? Talking about politics because this is an issue that our politics looks at and addresses. Maybe there's a political party that's really kind of championed it. But the reason I'm talking about it, the reason I think Christians should be talking about it, is because it has to do, it is a part of this piece of how do we love people well. And so what I'm saying with that is there are going to be conversations on my Facebook page, on any of my social media pages, or the podcast, or the blog, that quite frankly are controversial. There are going to be conversations. I've had a number of people say, it's definitely not the majority of my listeners and readers, but there's a number of people who would like me to never talk about race or never talk about politics again. And they've said that. They have communicated that one way or another. And my response to that is, listen, something that I've been evaluating, especially in the last year, but it started even before that, is to what degree are these conversations serving and benefiting the church? Like, are they actually fruitful and helpful? Because the last thing I'm trying to do is stir the pot and just have hot conversations for controversial sake. It's definitely not a matter of viewership. In fact, my takes on politics and social issues have typically led in people unfollowing me. So it is not, if I wanted to talk about something that would make me popular, I'd talk about sex and romance. Those are the things that get a lot of views and get a lot of hits, but that's just one piece that I feel called to engage. And there's a whole other host of things that I know for a fact that even pastors are scared to address, and yet I believe it behooves us as pastors to pastor our people through the times that we're in. And so all the things that I write about and address on the podcast and so forth, these are things that I'm living in, things I have experience with firsthand. I'm not just pontificating theory and hot takes and stuff like these. These are practical things that in real life I'm working through with people, or have worked through with people, and we're learning and growing ourselves. But all that to say that if you don't want to be hearing me talk about how we can grow in being theologically anchored, how we can grow in emotional and spiritual health, how we can grow in loving people well, if you'd rather have a feed that is something you can always know that you agree with, and it's not going to force you to think deeply and to even confront things in your own life, if you'd rather have a feed that has conversations that are fun and light and everybody can kind of get along, then you're probably not going to want to follow my work. And I just invite you to move along. I'm sharing this fairly openly for a number of reasons. One is I just want that to be clear. Like, I don't know, I started 10 years ago writing, and it started as a blog. And then eventually I wrote some ebooks, and then I wrote a real book, and then I started a podcast. Like, everything just kind of evolved. And the topics have always, especially the first 4 years or so, 3-4 years, had a little bit of a birdshot feel to it. Probably it's just like a ton of different topics. There was a period after probably around 2018, 2019, where I started to be more intentional about certain topics that I would address. But it's still kind of somewhat had, and the reality is, being theologically anchored, emotionally, spiritually healthy, loving people well, like, that's still really broad. So on one hand, I guess what I'm saying is I don't know that I'm going to do any better at like narrowing all my articles are about interpreting the New Testament or something. Like, that's just not really even what I have interest in doing, even though there are people who do that and are serving the church well. My point is, the thing that I can promise to you as a listener, as a reader, the thing that I can promise to you is that if I'm sharing something on my author page, make a distinction between that and my personal Facebook profile, because I do share a lot of different stuff on my Facebook profile. I mean, I actually don't share just a ton on there, but it's a lot of different types of stuff. Like, there's not really any organization to it. But if it's on my author profile, if it's on YouTube, my YouTube channel, if it's on the podcast, on the blog, then it is coming from the posture of how can we grow in being theologically anchored? How can we grow in being emotionally, spiritually healthy? And then how can we grow in loving people well? That's why that's there. And I just share this honestly and transparently. A number of years ago, I was addressing some topics that were really controversial, and a lot of people kind of leached on. And this is something that I just continue to wrestle with, like, what is a healthy way to handle this as an author? But people love to come onto your platform and spew their thoughts, and like, in a given week, they can post more on my Facebook page than I even post on my Facebook page, because they're on multiple different threads and multiple comments on those threads, and sometimes it's all good and just great conversations, but there was a significant amount of just cyberbullying that was taking place, ad hominem attacks. And there were a number of people in my life, like people I engage with, not just through social media, but they're in my life, who started talking about how they quit reading my stuff or they quit following me on Facebook because of the comment sections. And that just tore me apart, because they were the kinds of people that I would want to engage in these comment sections, that have so much value to add to the conversation if they so feel led. And I want a place that that provides the safety for having meaningful, hard conversations, even at times, and knowing that people aren't going to be attacked, people aren't going to be belittled and demeaned. And so, yeah, that's kind of why I'm sharing this. This is pretty much a podcast episode in and of itself now. By now, I'm approaching the 20-minute mark here, but I just wanted to share that with you all, kind of give an update. You'll be seeing a lot more from me now as I begin to re-engage social media, the blog, podcasting. You'll see some changes taking place on on the blog and different areas. But yeah, if you want a full update on what happened specifically to Asher Whitmer in 2024, click the link below. Listen to the podcast episode. That's a full hour episode, basically just giving an update, going into way more detail than I've ever shared publicly before as far as what happened with my health, and then also kind of what we're looking at going forward. So I am grateful and appreciate each one of you, whether or not I know you personally, but I look at us as we are here in this is one aspect of the world, one aspect of the Christian world, and we're having conversations that can help us grow and be able to reflect Christ in a healthier way, and ultimately be able to be a part of the transforming work that God invites us to be a part of. And so if you're still listening to this, watching this, if you've been a follower of my work, that is the journey that we're on here. And I'm sure you follow a lot of different authors and podcasters. And I think that's ultimately, especially Christians, that's what we're all trying to do. We kind of have our different takes and have our different perspectives and experiences, and that's part of the value that we all bring to the table. And so just thank you for being on this journey, and I look forward to years ahead, but especially as we look at the end of February here, beginning of March, and starting things up again.